October 14th, 1943, 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. A German fighter pilot watched his 17th B-17 flying fortress spiral earthward, trailing black smoke. Through his canopy, unescorted American bombers struggled desperately to maintain formation. The mathematics were simple. 60 bombers would never return home that day. 291 had entered German airspace. Only 231 would make it back. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans called it Black Thursday. German pilots laughed at the vulnerable bombers flying deep into Germany without fighter protection. "They come to us like gift packages," one pilot radioed. "No escorts past the border, we own the sky." They were right, American fighters couldn't reach Berlin. The P-47 Thunderbolt had only 375 miles combat radius. The P-38 Lightning froze at high altitude. German confidence seemed mathematically justified. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutzgaland, one of the Luftwaffe's deadliest bomber destroyers, had perfected the head-on attack diving through formations at 400 miles per hour, firing 2-second bursts, escaping before gunners could react. By October 1943, he'd destroyed 55 heavy bombers. Each victory reinforced absolute certainty. American bombers would never reach Berlin escorted. It was physically impossible. The distance was too great. But what if an American fighter could fly 1,100 miles round-trip to Berlin and back with fuel left to fight? What if German laughter turned to shock when, just 4 months later, on March 4th, 1944, American fighters appeared over Berlin for the first time in history? How did the impossible become reality? And how did it destroy the Luftwaffe in mere months? The answer changed aerial warfare forever. The German fighter pilots of late 1943 had every mathematical reason for absolute confidence, backed by months of successful combat proving their tactical superiority over unescorted American heavy bombers. Men like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutzgaland, Hauptmann Georg Peter, Eder, and Major Walter Dahl had systematically turned the interception of American bomber formations into a refined science of destruction through months of tactical development and combat refinement. They had developed sophisticated tactics specifically designed to exploit the bomber formation's inherent weaknesses, perfected through trial and error over countless interceptions. The standard American combat box formation, 8 to 21 bombers, arranged in a complex three-dimensional defensive pattern, had been carefully designed based on the theory that massed defensive firepower could ward off any fighter attacks through overwhelming volume of fire. Each B-17 flying fortress bristled with 1350 caliber machine guns mounted in carefully positioned turrets, theoretically covering every conceivable angle of approach with interlocking fields of fire that should make attacking suicidal. In practice, however, German pilots had methodically identified critical tactical weaknesses through systematic analysis of hundreds of engagements. Blind spots in the nose where armor was thinnest, limited ammunition supplies that could be exhausted through repeated attacks, and most devastatingly, the profound psychological impact of sustained, coordinated attacks on bomber crews already exhausted from hours of formation flying. Hauptmann Heinz Nock, commanding 5, JG-11, had personally perfected the terrifying head-on attack that ruthlessly exploited the B-17's absolutely weakest defensive position with mathematical precision. On February 26, 1943, he had shot down his first four-engine heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie, and by October 1943 had methodically destroyed 16 more through relentless application of refined technique. His attack method was brutally precise and efficient. Approach from 12 o'clock high at maximum speed, dive through the formation at over 400 miles per hour, fire a carefully timed 2-second burst directly at the vulnerable cockpit and exposed engines, then break away violently before the top turret gunners could effectively track and engage the rapidly closing target. The statistics of German aerial dominance supported this confidence with brutal mathematical clarity. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe had shot down 60 bombers, a staggering 16% of the attacking force in a single day of coordinated interceptions. American losses proved so catastrophically severe that deep penetration raids into the heart of Germany were suspended for weeks, while commanders desperately reconsidered their strategic bombing doctrine and tactical approach. When the raids resumed with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, forever after known as Black Thursday, the results were even more devastatingly one-sided. 77 bombers lost or written off, over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single afternoon of combat, losses that threatened the entire viability of daylight strategic bombing. Major Egon Meyer, Gruppenkommandeur of the 3rd, JG2, had brilliantly developed the Sturmgruppe Company front attack 8 for 190 seconds, approaching line abreast in perfect coordination, saturating the bombers' defensive fire with multiple simultaneous targets approaching from different angles. The psychological impact on bomber crews was absolutely devastating. American gunners, faced with 8 fighters approaching simultaneously at a combined closing speed exceeding 600 miles per hour, had mere seconds to prioritize targets and often shot desperately at empty sky in their mounting panic and confusion. The root of American vulnerability lay in simple, immutable physics that no amount of courage or tactical brilliance could overcome. No Allied fighter in operational service during 1943 possessed the range necessary to escort bombers deep into the industrial heart of Germany and return safely to English bases. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter and backbone of fighter command, had a combat radius of only 375 miles, even with external drop tanks barely enough to reach the German border, but nowhere near sufficient for deep penetration missions to targets like Berlin, Munich, or Prague. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning theoretically could fly farther with its larger fuel capacity, but suffered devastating mechanical problems at high altitude in European winter conditions, with engines failing catastrophically and control surfaces freezing solid at 25,000 feet. This fundamental limitation meant that American bomber formations flew the most dangerous portion of their missions over heavily defended German industrial targets completely alone and vulnerable. German fighter controllers simply tracked bomber streams on radar, calculating with mathematical precision exactly where Allied escorts would reach their maximum range and turn back toward England. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic with chilling professional precision in recorded combat reports. "We tracked the bomber streams continuously on Freya radar, calculating exactly where their escorts would turn back for England. The moment the little friends departed, we pounced with overwhelming force." The P-51 Mustang's development began not as an American initiative born from strategic vision, but as an urgent British Purchasing Commission request driven by desperate wartime needs. In April 1940, with Britain standing alone against Nazi Germany and facing critical fighter shortages, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation seeking additional P-40 Warhawk fighters to supplement RAF strength. Instead of simply accepting the order, North American aviation's visionary president James Dutch Kindleberger made an audacious proposal. His company would design and build an entirely new, superior fighter in just 120 days, an impossibly short development timeline that conventional wisdom deemed impossible. The result was the NA-73X prototype, which first flew on October 26, 1940, a remarkable achievement in rapid aircraft development that demonstrated American engineering innovation and industrial capability. Initially powered by an Allison V 1710 inline engine producing 1,150 horsepower, the early Mustang Mark I excelled dramatically at low altitude with exceptional speed and handling, but struggled disappointingly above 15,000 feet, precisely the altitude where high-altitude bomber escort was most critically needed. The RAF, recognizing the aircraft's potential despite this limitation, used these early Allison-powered variants effectively for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack roles, where their exceptional range and superb low-altitude performance proved invaluable. But the revolutionary transformation that would fundamentally change the air war came from an unlikely marriage of American airframe design with British engine technology international cooperation that neither nation could have achieved alone. In April 1942, brilliant Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang and immediately recognized its extraordinary untapped potential with the trained eye of an experienced aviator and engineer. The airframe was aerodynamically superb, cleaner and more efficient than even the legendary Spitfire which had saved Britain in 1940. What it desperately needed was a fundamentally better power plant capable of high-altitude performance. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same revolutionary two-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest high-altitude Spitfire variants with such devastating effectiveness. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942, and the results were absolutely extraordinary, exceeding even optimistic expectations. Maximum speed increased dramatically from 390 miles per hour to 440 miles per hour at altitude. Most importantly for the strategic bombing campaign, performance above 20,000 feet transformed completely from marginal to exceptional, and service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary wasn't merely its impressive performance statistics, but its unprecedented operational range that defied every assumption about single-engine fighter capabilities. The secret lay in three critical engineering factors working synergistically. Exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its revolutionary laminar flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons in a much lighter and more efficient airframe, and the crucial ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation that plagued other fighters. The laminar flow wing, designed by North American aviation's brilliant aerodynamicist Edgar Schmood, maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than conventional wing designs, through careful shaping and surface quality control. This reduced parasitic drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency that gave the Mustang its legendary endurance. While a P-47 Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same indicated airspeed and altitude. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles, already farther than any other fighter. With 108-gallon ferry tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to an unprecedented 850 miles, enough to reach Berlin, engage in 20 minutes of combat, and return to England with fuel reserves. No other single-engine fighter in the world, German, British, Japanese, or American, could match this combination of range, performance, and combat effectiveness. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group for their historic role introducing the aircraft to combat, received the first operational P-51Bs in November 1943 at their base at Boxted in Essex, England. Technically assigned to the 9th Air Force for tactical support of the coming invasion, they were immediately tasked with supporting 8th Air Force strategic bombing missions, a testament to how desperately long-range escorts were needed. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth R. Martin, had just days to convert his experienced pilots from the familiar P-47 Thunderbolt to the completely new fighter with its different handling characteristics, cockpit layout, and operational procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn E. Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group with distinction, flew one of the very first orientation flights and later recalled with vivid clarity, "The moment I lifted off and felt the controls respond, I knew immediately we had something truly special. The Mustang handled like a precision sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt we'd been flying. It was responsive, incredibly fast, and most importantly for our mission, it could fly forever on internal fuel." The first P-51B combat mission came on December 1st, 1943, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France, designed to test the aircraft's combat characteristics and identify any operational problems. The first actual escort mission followed just 4 days later on December 5th to Amiens, a relatively short-range target that allowed controllers to evaluate performance. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bomber stream, serving more as an operational combat test than a full-scale escort mission, evaluating everything from formation flying to radio procedures. They encountered no Luftwaffe fighters during this inaugural mission, but the sortie proved the aircraft's basic suitability for high-altitude escort work and revealed no critical deficiencies that would prevent expanded operations. March 4th, 1944, 25,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany. Through scattered clouds drifting below like cotton fields, the sprawling outline of Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, the heart of Nazi Germany, the city Hermann Göring had personally sworn would never see enemy aircraft, was clearly visible to Allied aircrew for the first time in history. Above the city, in perfect combat box formation stretching for miles, flew 660 American heavy bombers, B-17, Flying Fortresses, and B-24 Liberators, loaded with high explosive and incendiary bombs. And surrounding them protectively, weaving intricate defensive patterns like sheepdogs guarding their flock, were scores of sleek single-engine fighters bearing unmistakable American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represented far more than a mere tactical achievement or operational milestone. It was a psychological demolition of German invincibility, a shattering of every assumption about the limits of Allied air power, and visible proof that nowhere in the Reich was now safe from American attack. Colonel Donald J. M. Blakesley, the aggressive and brilliant commanding officer of the 4th Fighter Group, had personally led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1,100-mile round trip that German military experts had repeatedly declared impossible for single-engine fighters. The 4th Fighter Group had received their revolutionary new P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, just 4 days earlier, and immediately accomplished what German strategic planners had confidently assured their leadership could never happen. For Luftwaffe pilots scrambling to intercept this unprecedented deep penetration, the sight was absolutely incomprehensible, contradicting everything they'd been taught about Allied fighter capabilities and operational limitations. They had been repeatedly told by their intelligence officers and commanders that Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was simply too far, physically impossible for single-engine aircraft to fly such distances and return. The fuel required alone made it mathematically impossible according to every calculation. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressively maneuvering after flying 500 miles from England, while German defenders were already running critically low on fuel after merely taking off from nearby airfields and climbing to combat altitude. The combat that followed over Berlin was savage and one-sided in ways that shocked both sides. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to defend their capital in the largest aerial battle over Berlin to date. But they faced not exhausted, ammunition-depleted bomber gunners barely able to defend themselves, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with significant altitude advantage and technically superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 confirmed victories in the swirling dogfights over Brandenburg. More significantly for the bomber crews they protected, numerous determined German attacks on the bomber formations were broken up before they could press home their attacks and inflict casualties. For American pilots experiencing their first combat in the revolutionary new fighter, the P-51B represented an absolute revelation in aircraft design and performance that exceeded even their optimistic expectations. Captain Don S. Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would become one of the European theatre's top Mustang aces with 21.83 confirmed aerial victories, described his first combat sortie in the type with enthusiasm that never diminished. The Mustang gave us absolutely everything we had dreamed of and more. We had the speed to catch any German fighter, even the fast 4-190. We had the maneuverability to dogfight successfully with the nimble Bf-109, and most importantly, we had the range to go anywhere the bombers went and still have fuel for extended combat. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Berlin triggered an immediate and profound crisis in the Luftwaffe High Command that would never be fully resolved. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring initially refused outright to believe the intelligence reports when his staff presented them. When confronted with undeniable proof gun camera footage from German fighters showing P-51 Mustangs marked with American insignia over the capital, he reportedly said with bitter resignation, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quotation lacks definitive primary source documentation and may be somewhat apocryphal, it accurately captures the profound shock and despair that swept through German military leadership upon realizing that Allied fighters could now reach any target in the Reich. The tactical and strategic implications were utterly devastating for German defensive planning. Every fundamental assumption about Reich defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond Allied escort fighter range. Training airfields, aircraft assembly plants, and vital factories had been deliberately located in central Germany, specifically because military planners believed they were completely safe from fighter attack. Now, seemingly overnight, American fighters could strafe training airfields near Prague, engage Luftwaffe formations over Munich, and escort bomber streams to literally any target within the Reich's borders with impunity. Major Günther Rahl, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 275 confirmed victories across multiple fronts, recognized the profound strategic shift with the clarity of an experienced combat veteran. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive's reach, it fundamentally transformed aerial warfare itself. We could no longer choose when and where to fight on our terms. The Americans brought the battle to us whenever they wished, wherever they wished, and we had to respond regardless of tactical disadvantage. February 28-25, 1944, forever known as Big Week. In American air combat history demonstrated with brutal mathematical clarity the completely transformed dynamics of the air war over Europe. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production facilities with P-51 Mustangs, providing comprehensive escort coverage throughout every phase of the missions for the first time. In just 6 days of intensive operations, the Americans flew 3,300 heavy bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties deep into German territory, losing 226 bombers, significant but sustainable casualties, while claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed in aerial combat. More critically for Germany's long-term prospects, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable veteran pilots, whose combat experience and tactical knowledge couldn't be replicated through any training program, no matter how intensive. The American strategy had fundamentally shifted from simply bombing industrial targets to actively seeking aerial combat at every opportunity. General James H. Jimmy Doolittle, newly commanding the 8th Air Force, had issued revolutionary new orders in January 1944. American fighters were to aggressively seek out and destroy Luftwaffe fighters wherever they could be found, rather than remaining in close defensive formations around bombers. Captain John T. Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group, who would finish the war with 18 confirmed victories, described the new, aggressive tactics with professional enthusiasm. "We'd escort the bombers all the way to their target and provide close cover during the bombing run, but the moment they dropped their bombs and turned for home, we'd go hunting. We'd dive to the deck, shoot up German airfields, catch their fighters vulnerable during takeoff or landing when they couldn't maneuver." The mathematics of attrition warfare now favored the Allies so overwhelmingly that German defeat became a mathematical certainty rather than a military possibility. In January 1944 alone, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots killed, missing, or permanently disabled. In February, losses climbed to 2,121 pilots. In March, they reached 2,115 pilots, unsustainable casualties that exceeded replacement capacity. These losses crucially included many irreplaceable expert and veteran aces with years of combat experience, hundreds of hours in type, and tactical knowledge that had been accumulated through survival of countless dogfights. Their combat effectiveness couldn't be replicated by any training program. American losses, while numerically significant in absolute terms, could be fully replaced by massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly through the sprawling training infrastructure across the United States. Every American pilot lost could be replaced within days with a fresh graduate. The P-51 represented far more than just extended operational range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority in every aspect of its design and production. The revolutionary K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots a decisive advantage in deflection shooting. This sophisticated gyroscopic sight automatically calculated proper lead angle based on target range and rate of turn, dramatically improving gunnery accuracy in the three-dimensional ballet of aerial combat. The Mustang's 6 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while individually less powerful than German 20mm or 30mm cannon, offered significant advantages in sustained firepower and ammunition capacity. A fully loaded P-51 carried 1,880 rounds, total enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire in extended engagements. German fighters armed with heavy cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire, just 60 rounds per gun for the Bf-109's 20mm cannon. In prolonged dogfights common over Germany, American pilots could afford to take multiple shots. German pilots couldn't waste a single burst. Behind the cold statistics and tactical analyses lay profound human tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teenage years, fought desperate battles 6 miles above the Earth in temperatures plunging to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, where mere survival demanded constant vigilance. The lucky ones died instantly, a cannon shell through the cockpit, instant obliteration. Others endured horrific fates, third-degree burns across their bodies, traumatic amputations from exploding cannon shells, or slow deaths descending in parachutes riddled with bullet holes, watching the Earth approach while bleeding out at 120 feet per second. Lieutenant William R. Bayer of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched with horror as the German pilot bailed out successfully. His parachute opened properly, but the pilot's flight suit was on fire from the initial hit. I could see him desperately trying to beat out flames on his flight suit and gloves as he descended. There was absolutely nothing anyone could do to help. I watched him burn for 3 minutes until he disappeared into clouds below. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7, one of the few jet fighter pilots to survive the war, described the fundamentally changed nature of aerial combat by 1944. In 1943, we were knights of the air, engaging in something approaching honorable combat with bomber formations. By 1944, we were being hunted relentlessly like animals. Mustangs would follow us directly back to our own airfields, circle overhead while we desperately tried to land with empty fuel tanks, then attack when we were most vulnerable. There was no safety anywhere in Germany. As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustang's unprecedented range enabled a devastating strategic campaign that would strangle the German war machine: the systematic destruction of synthetic oil production facilities. Synthetic oil plants at Leuna, Politz, and Brooks, previously beyond effective fighter escort range and therefore only lightly damaged by unescorted bomber raids, now faced regular, sustained precision attacks with full fighter protection against interception. The impact on German aviation fuel production was absolutely catastrophic. Production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to just 30,000 tons in July, and a completely inadequate 10,000 tons in September, barely 6% of peak capacity. Training flights were first curtailed, then eliminated entirely to preserve fuel for combat operations. New pilots began arriving at frontline combat units with as few as 50 hours, total flight time barely enough to take off and land safely compared to American replacement pilots with 300 to 400 hours, including extensive pilots, gunnery and tactical training. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-7 equipped with revolutionary Me-262 jets, described the impossible situation with bitter frustration. We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, over 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter, but we could barely fuel them for combat missions. I watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle on hardstands while Mustangs roamed freely overhead, masters of skies we could no longer contest. June 6, 1944 D-Day. The Allied invasion of Normandy demonstrated with absolute clarity the complete reversal of air superiority over Western Europe. On this single most critical day of the European war, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France compared to 14,674 Allied sorties, a ratio of nearly 5-0-1 that made German aerial opposition essentially irrelevant. Only 2 Luftwaffe fighters appeared over the invasion beaches that day. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such complete dominance that the largest amphibious invasion in human history proceeded under an impenetrable aerial umbrella, virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Germany's technological response came in revolutionary form. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter capable of 540 miles per hour, and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet, reaching 596 miles per hour, both dramatically faster than any Allied piston engine fighter. In the hands of experienced pilots, the Me-262 could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react effectively. Yet even these technological marvels couldn't reverse the tide of overwhelming Allied numerical and industrial superiority. Adolf Galland, Germany's General der Jagdflieger, personally flying Me-262 seconds with elite JV 44 inches 1945, shot down 7 aircraft but recognized the complete futility. We were like a few magnificent tigers facing hundreds of determined wolves. For every Me-262 we could somehow fuel and fly. The Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over our airfields indefinitely, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. By early 1945, the mathematics of air combat had become utterly impossible for Germany to overcome. The United States produced 15,486 P-51 Mustangs during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups, equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this overwhelming force, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew at all. The kill ratios reflected this impossible imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 aerial victories for every lost dominance that made German resistance mathematically futile. The transformation from German pilots confidently laughing at unescorted American bombers in October 1943 to desperately cowering from relentless Mustang fighters represents one of the most complete reversals in military aviation history. In less than 6 months from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned by industrial mathematics they couldn't overcome. The final statistics tell the story. 15,486 P-51 seconds produced versus limited German fighter production, 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat by Mustangs, 4,131 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 11-to-1 kill ratio in aerial combat, 2,520 operational $2 losses, sustainable for America, catastrophic for Germany. Heinrich Severloh began June 6, 1944, believing invasion would be repelled. German pilots in October 1943 laughed at vulnerable bombers. By March 1944, that laughter had died forever, replaced by terrible recognition that everything they believed about their enemies, their superiority, and victory had been catastrophically wrong. The P-51 Mustang proved that in industrial warfare, victory belongs to those who can produce the most, innovate the fastest, and cooperate most effectively, and it wrote that lesson across German skies in ways impossible to deny.